Pistons fans, let's talk. Let's talk about Tobias Harris and how I approve of this deal. Regardless, or it really, I really don't take much thought about his contract with Philadelphia. That was Philadelphia. However, when he was with the Pistons, or okay, when you have Philadelphia and the Clippers, they are contenders, right? At the time that they, at the time they added Tobias, they didn't do anything much with it. That has nothing to do with Tobias. Tobias type of player is Tobias type of player. He's not a max guy. He's not, you said, top tier, marketed player. So he gave you what he gave you. Yet when it comes to Detroit, or him signing with Detroit for 2 and 52, or for 2 and 52, this move put me in the mind of Pudge Rodriguez some years back with the Tigers. If you guys are old enough to be familiar with that, when the Tigers was at that point, this is when Leland and Dombrowski was well, you could say Dombrowski and Leland was at the foundation, or they was building the foundation. They were just starting the foundation. I mean, just starting the foundation after they've been in ruins for quite some time. And they start off with a Pud Rodriguez signing. Pudge Rodriguez signing. They start off with that. The next thing you know, they ended up trading to the Marlins, and they ended up getting Cabrera, and I believe it was the pitcher Fisher, I believe, or Sanchez. And then next, the dominoes start to fall. At the same time, they already have Verlander, and that was pretty much it. Then they start adding pieces, adding pieces, adding pieces. So I'm going to put this tenure of, let's say, Trajan Langdon and company as that Dombrowski type deal. And I believe he picked up his Leland and Bickerstaff. Now, Bickerstaff wasn't my first recommendation for hiring for the job. I had a guy. My candidate was Chris Quinn. I wanted to go first time. I wanted to go fresh blood. Nonetheless, at the same time, as I've been overhearing a little bit of backstory on Bickerstaff, and most recently what he has done in Cleveland, by them being a upcoming out of existence team, especially I believe he was, I don't want to say he was put into ruins before he took over. I think he was an interim head coach, and then he, I don't know if he was a full-time head coach. I don't know how that goes. Yet the previous coach put them in a couple steps back, even though they had Evan Mobley, who was drafted the same year as Cade. So they had the so-called foundation, the building block, if you will, and they just couldn't get it done. And then he comes in, and if you're winning your first round in the playoffs, you're doing something pretty well. There was a couple steps of progression each year. Nonetheless, and Bickerstaff, I believe that he is their Dave Dombrowski. However, well, I won't say however. One thing I have a great deal of respect for Mike Valenti. I do, because he comes from two different perspectives. He comes from the perspective that he is not a Detroiter, even though it's like he's stationed here. He's serving the forces, and he's stationed somewhere, so he's technically a part of that. Especially if you've been stationed there for quite some time at a location, you become so familiar with it that you become a part of it. You're adopted, if you will. Nonetheless, he is not a Detroiter, so he doesn't have the Detroit blood. And by saying that, he's going to take shots at Detroit, even though he so-called say he represents. So it's almost like he's fair weather. It depends how the wind blows. If it's Knicks or the Giants, or any New York sports team, whatever, is progressing, he's going to take shots at the Pistons. I mean, at Detroit. That's what he's going to, or Michigan itself. He's going to take shots. If they're not progressing, he's going to it's going to be a little bit of empathetic, a little bit of apathy. It's going to be a little bit of, sensitivity for Michigan. Same when they hired the guy for the Tigers, the manager, I think it was the general manager, whatever. They hired him. He was backing that up. Okay, when they hired Steve Eisman, he was backing that up. Now he's so much turned against that. So he's gonna blow in the wind. I I respect his take because it comes from that perspective. I'm with you. At the same time, I'm not with you. If you're a Michigander, you're going to be highly sensitive of what he says, even though you shouldn't really take it to account of what he's saying. He's not really one of you. He's adopted. So with that being said, the hiring or the move that of the Tobias Harris, it was a good move because with a losing franchise that it is, how do you expect? Okay, if no teams want to be a part of your assets, no matter how, you know, do, no, how can I say it? Detroit is like one of those cities. I won't say Detroit. It put me. You ever seen a rich person that you have a group of colleagues that are rich and they come together at their, whatever their gathering, country club or however they get together, and among the rich group, you have those who accumulate their riches a certain way, and then you always get that one who accumulated differently. So they are on the same class of being rich. Let's say they all are multi-billionaires on the same amount. It depends on how much. I mean, in which way you accumulated your riches to get that respect. If you done it the self same way that everybody else has done it, you're part of the club. If you've done it differently, you're outside of the club. When it comes to the likes of Bill Davidson or even the Pistons itself, the Pistons is part of that club. The NBA really don't really want to mess with Detroit. And I want to say this based upon how Bill Davidson built it. Now, if you were talking about this was the 20s, the 30s, somewhere, you're talking when Detroit was really the juggernaut city, everybody wanted to be a part of it. Yet, Detroit is not that positioned anymore, or not definitely in that position anymore. So, you have to build it a different way. They're doing it, not saying they're taking a page out of the Tigers, yet they're doing it the self same way how the Tigers have done it. You add a who is the gentleman that they also Ordonez with the Tigers after they got Pudge Rodriguez, they got Ordonez. At the same time, they was bringing in Cabrera, and they have Verlander Sanchez. And then next you know, they made a trade for Fisher, and then these other pieces started to come together, and then all of a sudden they are in the World Series 2 years straight. And it only took them, I want to say, roughly 3 to 4 years within that frame. The first move was done. I agree with Valenti about the cage stance. I also agree with, Rico when he stated that he would have liked for the Pistons to get draft capital or be a part of be a third party and part of a deal. It doesn't work like that with the Pistons. The only time that I seen that happen is when Detroit was the one getting fleeced, so to speak, and that was the Rasheed Wallace deal. The Pistons had to give up 2 first-round picks and some assets, some expiring deals, to get someone that Atlanta really didn't care for. Boston was just at the time they was really Danny Ainge was just starting, I believe, how to do something with Boston. I believe that was Danny Ainge at the time. And so Detroit was just a part of a deal. It's very the way that I believe that Tom Trajan is set up now, he's like, well, you're not going to be able to do me any kind of way. At Troy Weaver's the exact same way. Most general managers or most organization dealing business with Detroit, they wanted to be able to take advantage of Detroit. They totally have no respect for Detroit. I don't know if that's an NBA thing. I don't know if that's an owner's thing. It is they don't have no respect for Detroit. Yet for the likes of OKC, they get all the respect. You know, the likes of Orlando, they get all the respect. Houston, even Chicago, Miami, and now you have, of course, Dallas, and of course, Boston's always going to be there. LA's always going to be there. Philadelphia and New York are trying to get back to that core four. Nonetheless, you have those teams that just won't get the respect that they're due. So Detroit have to do backdoor deals. The backdoor deals is that deals that takes a season to get done. It takes a long time to get it done. Nothing, the splash, type of moves doesn't happen for for the likes of the Pistons, nor for the Lions, nor for the Red Wings. With the Red Wings may be the exception to the rule, and maybe the Illiches may be the exception to the rule. When they go all out, they go all out. When they was going out for the World Series, and I think that was going to be in tribute towards Mike Illich. When they went after the pitcher, David Price, and they were star studded, and this Prince Fielder, they were just star studded, and so they do go out for it when they are in position to do it. The Pistons had to make this first move, which is Tobias Harris. Now, as far as him saying that Cade won out, I partially agree with that. I said that from day one about Cade is running thin. They have 1 year, not even 1 year. They have one quarter of the year to a half of the year to show by deadline. Let's say that by trade deadline, they have something to show Cade. They have to prove to Cade that, okay, we're not just going in the right direction. Results are showing. And that's why I believe they hired Bickerstaff versus a first timer. Why? Because Cade is looking at the guy Bickerstaff as, who can I respect? Who knows what he knows? And it's not about selling it. It's more so, show me the proof. When Larry Brown came to the Pistons, or Dave Dombrowski, not Dave Dombrowski, Jim Leland came to the Tigers, and when Larry Brown came to the Pistons, or even who was the guy for the Red Wings at the time? I'm drawing a blank. Bowman. When they came, they had a proven track history, or being a part of clubs that was like in the state of where the Red Wings were, at the state of where the Tigers were, at the state of where the Pistons were. Bickerstaff just proved that he can do that. Chris Quinn, the guy, my candidate, didn't prove that. So you have to make a move like this. If you trade your Langen, the only thing about it, Trajan Langdon doesn't have the history other than New Orleans. Yeah, yes, he does. I believe he was the general manager at New Orleans. So yeah, they have a little window with Cade. Those two versus the likes of Troy Weaver and Monty Williams. Neither one of them have been in this type of situation as the likes of the Pistons, and they were just pretty much trying to figure it out as time goes. These two, I believe, is solid hires that they've done it enough to give the respect. They've done it recently, so Cade can look at film. He could look at, he could do, his check the backstory on it, and he could see the results that they've done this. So, with that being said, I really this Tobias Harris pick put me in the mind of a Pudge Rodriguez move. It's not a trade per se. It's like a trade. You have to start this as your starting point. The same thing with the Lions. You have to have a starting point. They mentioned that I mean, if you were to say, well, the Stafford move was a starting point, you can say that. Yet at the same time, the fans wasn't open arms about Jared Goff. They was calling Jared Goff. Jared Goff. I mean, this is locally. They was now they turned that page and they all look for it. But from day one, I have the recordings to prove it. That from day one, I said Jared Goff is Troy Aikman without Jimmy Johnson with the Lions. And then they hired Dan Campbell, which was their Jimmy Johnson, and so forth. And now they're taking off. So, with that being said, this is the proper move the Lions have to make. I'm not the Lions, forgive me, the Pistons. This is the proper move the Pistons have to make. The next move will be is to find a Cabrera. Yet it has to be the right deal. I think it's going to take up to the midseason. This where you have the Tobias Harris and Tim Hardaway and even the likes of your young guys. You're still in evaluation mode. So if the fans were to say they should have made a splash, or even the local media may say that's for ratings talk. They have to say that. Yet they realistically understand knows that nobody really want to deal with Detroit. Or at the same time, no fan. They even will go on the record by saying nobody wants to be here. But at the same time, they bark at the Pistons because they don't make moves to get people to come here. If you're saying that nobody wants to come here, how can you get people to come here? So they're pretty much going to contradict themselves. That's why I say Valenti is a blow in the wind type of take. You you're gonna get some legitimate takes with him, whereas actually is an outside view. You're gonna and you're gonna be dead on. It's gonna be really good to hear. Then at the same time, you're gonna get that biased take where he's gonna be he's the enemy of Detroit. Because I'm an enemy of Michigan because he's really not a Michigander. He once again he's just adopted. So the Tobias Harris is a good starting point. The Tim Hardaway is a good starting point. If they when they if they everything goes into play and it's time Fontecchio, that would be a good signing. Those are three good solid signings. You didn't have to sign Cade, but at the same time, it does show. You know, it's a. I don't know if it's the right time to do it or if it's the wrong time to do it. It doesn't move anything. It Cade was never the situation. It was how does the organization build with Cade? That was always the problem. How do you, and I don't think Troy Weaver ever considered building with Cade. Not saying he was building without Cade, even though he selected him. I don't consider that he was considered building with Cade because the pieces that he was putting together doesn't match with Cade. It was just once again, we're just buying time, I guess. But anyway, I rambled long enough. The next move I look at is going to be a disgruntled star that wants out. You have two reasonable contracts in Hardaway and Harris by deadline. Two reasonable contracts along with young assets, and you may. I think that New York their first round pick is in conversations with the Knicks. So I don't know. You still, and plus you have 25 million. You still is in play for disgruntled. If for to make a slight argument against what Valenti is saying about even Rico when they say about being a third party, that takes time. Being a third party, that takes time. That means you have to be in a position for this, which they sort of was, and it sort of wasn't. They didn't have Tobias Harris. So I say by trade deadline, you can be that, yeah, you could be that third party. Right now, the first quarter of the season was basically a evaluation still. You're seeing what you have with your young guys. It's a quarter. The quarter of the season by the time of the deadline, I believe around about the 15th of February or the 21st around about that time The players that you sign, they can be considered tradable if that rule is still intact. You could look at the likes of those two being moved for a championship type of caliber team. Now you're talking about those first rounders, and I get it if you were considered talking about having first rounders building with the likes of Tobias. Most people really don't respect Tobias. This is where I disagree with the whole call throwing Tobias up under the bus. He is a Pudge Rodriguez. He's a proven vet with regardless of what he did in Philadelphia. Philadelphia wasn't winning or losing with he wasn't the difference maker. If they brought him in there to be the difference maker, the fault is them. They couldn't get anyone else. They couldn't get anyone. If they offer him that type of money, and you couldn't get a top tier talent, a centerpiece, you couldn't get that to go along with Embiid. And I'm not, making light of the signing of Tobias for the Sixers. I'm just saying that says a lot about that organization at the time. Now they can get a Paul George. They couldn't get a Paul George during that time. So Tobias Harris is what Tobias Harris. It's like drafting, if you're drafting three and you draft a player that doesn't live up to the third selection overall, that's not that player's fault that you drafted them. It's not Tobias' fault that you gave him that max money, and you expected him to be something that he's not. That's not his fault. I am my record or my resume speaks for itself. What type of player that I am. So anyway, with that being said, Piston fans, this is a good hire a good signing with Tobias Harris. The next couple moves is you can see what they're doing. For the fans that may say I don't know what they're doing, you can see what they're doing. When you're a franchise that's in ruin, you have to build it how you can build it. And I look at the Tigers' blueprint with this, not the Lions. Why? Because the Lions was already put in position to excel. They just couldn't excel up under Patricia for obvious reasons. Nonetheless, Bob Quinn put them in position to excel. He just didn't know how to excel. And not Bob Quinn, talking about Patricia. So he wore out his welcome, and they were going. I think I'm going to say this is a 500 team right now. It doesn't matter how undeveloped they are. You can see that the page is turned. You can see it. Troy Weaver did a great job by putting the Pistons in this position. And they needed Monty Williams to do what he did to get to this point. For 1 year, they just needed to do what he did. Now the fans may say like, no, he should have been better for $65 million. No, the same thing what you did for Matt Patricia. They did what they had to do to put you in the position. They have to do that last drop of cleaning up. Joe Dumars, from Joe Dumars' end of his tenure to the passing of the torch towards Stan Van Gundy, the franchise was in ruin. The same way how the Pistons were going to work crew was built, the same way how the Bad Boys group is being built. It's the exact same way how this Corn group is being built. That's why I'm saying I can't take Mike Valenti, his take serious. I respect it because it's outside perspective. It's outside view. I respect it for that perspective. Yet understanding how it's done here, I can't take that. I wouldn't hold that against him or be torn to pieces about his perspective or his opinion. This is how Detroit teams do it. Very specifically, how the Pistons team does it. You have to get that one guy that you could say he's a name, he's a brink of a name or not of a name. Yet he's not done. And then at the same time, you have to get him at a reasonable price. within the frame of being a losing organization. So if you look at the history of the Detroit teams that has been at the bottom of their rightful sports, they done it the same way. Virtually in Michigan, every other place, every other city, or they may do it differently. How it's done here with the four major sports, professional sports, they all do it the same way when they're building from the bottom to the top. You have to find that one piece that is a building block at the same time. It's like it's a perfect piece. It's the perfect. They're hungry, they're dedicated, and they want to be here. At the same time, they are all-star esque, maybe in a development, maybe blowing off the dust, if you will, or shaking off some rust. And you get that in the likes of a Bill Wallace. You get that in the likes in a Pudge Rodriguez. You get that in the likes of Isaiah Thomas. You get that in the likes of Jared Goff. You get that in the likes of these diamonds. Yet the other team has to throw them away. They're diamonds, and I want to say Tobias Harris is. I'm going to say he has a heavy, heavy, heavy chip on his shoulder, but at the same time, he doesn't have to be the guy. That's what makes this signing so perfect for me. He doesn't have to be the guy. He has to be the player that he is. He all he has to do is be the player that he is. He doesn't have to be the guy who helped carries the load for Embiid. He don't have to be that guy. Or how he was, well, Clippers was actually just starting to build. He doesn't have to be here. He could be the second or the third piece. He could be that guy. He could be the B. I still say that Cade is he's 1A. He's the sidekick, if you will. I still say Cade is a sidekick. Now Tobias he's okay with being the third piece, and what you paid him for, I agree. Now I would say the Pistons need to stack the deck. I don't know if what could you I don't know if any team that has the, let's say, the likable piece, or the dream scenario piece, they'll be willing to trade with Detroit for. It's not that they're Utah doesn't need money. They're rebuilding, so it's a different deal. So they want assets, especially with Danny Ainge. Danny Ainge, if he's any indication what he did in Boston, he's duplicating that in Utah. Yet Utah is just like Boston. They do it a certain way. I don't believe they interact with Detroit. Yeah, we don't want. I am mistaken. If there's going to be, you know what? I stand corrected. Laurie Marketing could end up being a Piston. That's not a wishful thinking. Utah have been doing business with Detroit. I don't know if that was before Danny Ainge or during the course of Danny Ainge. Utah have been doing business with Detroit. So you guys want maybe Kessler. You guys know that I'm high on him. Maybe him on marketing. Detroit may for Kessler they may have to give up they may have to give up the likes of some assets. You may have to give up more than Jay Ivey. You may have to give up Jay Ivey and Duran, which it defeats the point. Unless if you get rid of Duran, the only way that I would consider doing that if I was bringing in Miles Bridges, and I was getting also a Lawyer Marketing or or Kessler. I think it's Maxwell Kessler. I think this is his first name. I'm drawing a blank with his first name. Yeah, I would let go of Duran doing that situation if I'm getting assets back in return. That will be. I mean, another other words, there has to be a plan because I would move Tobias Harris to the 4 spot, 3-4, and then I can have a 4-5 taking its place, and that will take out the likes of a Duran. Yet right now, if I can get a guy, I could plug them next to Duran. And even if I have to, if I were to let go of Duran, you see Duran, I have Duran, Ivy, and Stewart, along with some money and some draft picks, some future draft picks. I can I can get a Lauri Marketing with that. Because all three of those pieces for Utah, with Detroit, they may not be a good package. Yet for Utah, if, other organizations look at Utah a little different than how they look at Detroit. They would package that, and they could get another building block. They could. So the Pistons are still in play. I I rambled long enough. Pistons fans, I salute.